It is important to start with a straight fabric edge since the accuracy of your strips and squares is determined by your first cut. Fold the fabric in half, matching the selvages at the top. If you are working in a smaller space or on a small cutting mat, fold the fabric again so there are 4 layers. Smooth out any wrinkles and place on the cutting mat, keeping the selvages even. The fold should be closest to you. Place the 6.5-inch square ruler on top of the fabric, aligning one of the ruler's lines with the fabric's folded edge. Position the 6.5 by 24-inch ruler next to the square ruler so the rectangular ruler lies just over the left raw edge. Slide the square ruler away, keeping your left hand firmly on the rectangular ruler. The raw edge of the fabric should be under the rectangular ruler. Hold the rotary cutter next to the right edge of the ruler. With the rotary cutter pressed firmly against the ruler, roll it away from you using a firm downward pressure to cut through the layers of fabric. You now have a straight edge to begin cutting fabric strips. Be careful not to move the fabric or you may need to repeat the straightening process. If you are left-handed, you will follow the same process except you will place the ruler on the right edge of the fabric and cut. Now that your fabric has a clean-cut, straight edge, you are ready to cut strips. Determine the width of the strips needed. We are cutting 2.5-inch wide strips. Align the ruler's 2.5-inch marking with the straightened fabric edge. Apply pressure on the ruler with your left hand and beginning at the bottom fold, cut along the right edge of the ruler all the way to the selvages. As you cut through the fabric, walk your fingers up the ruler. This keeps pressure on the ruler, making it less likely to slip out of position. With your hand on the ruler, place your little finger on the cutting mat. This helps to stabilize the ruler and prevent it from sliding when cutting the fabric. When you are cutting multiple strips of the same width, use a post-it note or masking tape on the ruler as a reminder of the measurement to cut. It may be necessary to re-straighten the fabric after cutting multiple strips. Whenever we move fabric, we re-straighten the fabric edge. When the strips you need to cut are wider than your ruler, you may need to use 2 rulers. For example, to cut 8.5-inch wide strips without an 8.5-inch wide ruler, place a smaller ruler along the fabric's straight edge, measuring in 2 inches. Place the 6.5 by 24-inch ruler against the right edge of the smaller ruler. Together, they total 8.5 inches. Cut along the right edge of the long ruler to make an 8.5-inch strip. Walk your fingers up the ruler as you cut to hold the ruler securely in place. When a project requires several squares, cutting the squares from strips makes the process faster. To cut squares from the fabric strips, place a folded strip on the cutting mat horizontally in front of you. Square off the end of the strip to remove the selvages. Determine the size of the squares you need. We cut 2.5-inch squares. Align the straightened edge of the strip with the ruler marking that corresponds to the width of the square you wish to cut. Use a post-it note on the ruler as a reminder of the size square to cut. Cut the number of squares needed. Pressing differs from ironing. Pressing is the motion of picking the iron up and putting it down on the fabric. Every seam needs to be pressed before adding another unit or block. When pressing a unit or block, press the seams from the back first. Press the stitch seam to embed the threads into the fabric. This will also eliminate any puckers. Press the seam allowance toward the darker fabric whenever possible. Turn the unit right side up and press open. Pressing seams open may be necessary if several seams come together in one area. To press seams open, move your fingernail ahead of the iron to hold the seam allowance open.